Hello and welcome back to the next part of this tutorial series in Godot multiplayer. So today we're going to be looking at several different things. We're going to be looking at setting up a gun and projectiles. We're going to look at spawn points so that we have different spawn points across the map. The first thing I want to do is set up spawn points. So what I'm going to do here is on the tile map layer, I'm actually going to rename this to level just so it's a little bit more clear. Then as a child, I'm going to add a node called marker 2D. The marker 2D node is basically just the node 2D, just with a slightly easier to see gizmo or whatever you want to call it. You can see it a little bit easier. I'm going to call this spawn point. And now what you want to do here is duplicate these and position them across the map. Now, the order you do these does kind of matter, because let's say you want, if two players play the game, you might want them to spawn on opposite corners. So you put your first spawn point over here and then your second one over here. And then, you know, two in between in the event that you have four players. So whatever order you put these as children, that is the order that players will be spawned in. The first player will spawn down here. The second player will spawn over here. Third will spawn here. Fourth will spawn here. And you can change that if you just reorder these nodes. Alright, so with those now set up, we can go ahead and collapse that. And let's come into our game scene. So, what we're going to need here is a list for all of the players that are in the game. So I'm going to make a var players is equal to array of player. And actually, one thing I forgot to do here is set the class name for the player script. So if we come into the player.gd, then at the top, very first line, put class name player. This makes it easier so that now we can get type hints in our array. I'm just going to set this to an empty list. Alright, so to do this, what we're going to do is in the add player function, we're going to go ahead and do player.global position is equal to $level dot get child, and then what we can do is players dot size and then dot global position. So what we're basically saying here is go to this level node and then get the child. Obviously, you know, this will be 0 for the first player, 1 for the second player, and so on, because what we're going to do is after we spawn in a player, we're going to go ahead and do players dot append player, just like so. Alright, so with that now done, if we run this, it actually won't work quite as we expect. You can see it didn't really work. The player that spawned in just fell out of the sky at 0, 0. To fix this, we actually have to override the multiplayer spawner default functionality for spawning in nodes. So what we can do here is, rather than adding the child, we can just return the player. Up in our ready function that we don't have, we're going to make it the ready function. What we can do is just simply $multiplayer spawner dot spawn function is equal to add player. So then what we want to do, now that we have set the spawn function, rather than calling this function directly, we want to do multiplayer spawner dot spawn, then do the same for this, and then again we'll have to pass in the peer ID, and then here we're going to do multiplayer dot get unique ID for the host. And if we run this, we should now see that spawn points work, and they do. Alright, so the next step now, I want to add in the gun for the player. So I'm going to come to the player scene, and we're going to add a few nodes here. It's going to be a node 2D. I'm going to rename this to gun container. Then we're going to add a sprite 2D. This will be the gun sprite. Then another node, this will be a marker 2D. This will be called muzzle. For the gun sprite, it's going to be this one right here. And then what I'm going to go ahead and do here is select the gun sprite and move it out. So now what's going to happen is we're going to rotate the gun container to look at the mouse position, and it'll look something like that. And then finally, what I'm going to do is grab the muzzle node and move it out right to the end of the gun. To have the gun look at the player's mouse, we want to come up here and say $gun container dot look at get global mouse position. You can see it now follows it, but if we join, you can see it's not syncing that. So like we looked at in the last tutorial, you can use the multiplayer synchronizer node to synchronize any property. So we can just add the gun container's rotation property to this, and now if we run this, it is now synchronized. Now you might be thinking, why is the other player's gun moving too? It's not a bug, don't worry. It's just because you're running both on the same computer, and it's just tracking your mouse from both applications. Alright, one other thing I like to do is, right now, the gun can go upside down when it's to the left of the player. So to fix that, we can just say if get global mouse position is less than, or I'm sorry, .x is less than global position .x, then we can go ahead and say gun container dot gun sprite, or I'm sorry, slash gun sprite dot flip vertically is equal to true. So now if our mouse position is less than the player's position, that gun sprite will flip. And then we want to obviously reset it if it's to the right, so just set that to false. Now if we host this, you can see that works, but once again, we're not synchronizing that, so it's not actually going to synchronize over the network. So again, just come to the multiplayer synchronizer, add the property. This is going to be on the gun sprite node, flip vertically. You can now see on the left it's being synchronized. So, alright, now the next step is to set up bullets. So, I'm going to make a new scene. This will be a area 2D. And then what we're going to do here is call it bullet. We're going to add a sprite 2D and a collision shape 2D. For the sprite, I'm going to do something that's a little bit cheesy, but this may come in useful for some of you guys in the future if you don't have a sprite set up for it already. I'm just going to steal the player's sprite for the bullet. And then what you can do, we obviously don't want the bullet to be that big, so if you come down to region, you can enable the region. And then what this basically allows you to do is take a section of the sprite. So I'm just going to take a 1x1 section of the player sprite. So that's just a useful tip to know. I'm going to go ahead and save this and make a new folder for bullet and save it there. I am going to also come down to visibility, modulate, and just change this to like a yellowish color. The collision shape, just new rectangle shape. This is 1x1. Let's go ahead and attach a script to the bullet. And what we want to do here is I'm going to just delete the ready function. And actually I'm going to delete the process function as well. And our physics process function. What we're going to do here is just move the bullet in the forward direction. So I'm going to make a variable for speed. This will be equal to 250. Then we can just go ahead and say position plus equals transform.x, which is kind of like the forward direction of the bullet, and speed times delta. And there we go. Now, the way I like to handle projectiles, I would not recommend attaching a multiplayer synchronizer to the bullet and then synchronizing the position every single frame, because what happens when you have 500 bullets on screen and all that data is being sent, and that's a lot of wasted bandwidth. Instead, what we can do is, since it's relatively simple to calculate the physics and they're all deterministic, we can just let each client calculate the position of the bullet instead. So we won't have any authority set up in this physics process. For detecting collisions, I'm going to leave that up to the person who shot the bullet. Okay, so what we're going to do is attach the body entered node or signal to the bullet. And then what we want to check is, again, I'm only wanting the client who shot the bullet to be the one who checks if it hit. So to do that, if not is multiplayer authority, then return. So now the rest of this function won't run unless we are the ones who shot the bullet. Okay, so what we can do here is say if body is player, then here is where we would apply damage. So we need to actually make that function. So I'm going to come into the player scene and make a function down here. Function take damage. Then I'm going to put an amount in here. And we also need a health variable at the top. So bar health is equal to, we'll just set it to 100 by default. Health minus equals amount. Then we can just say if health is less than or equal to 0, I'm actually just going to respawn the player with full health. So we need another variable up here. This will be constant max health. Set that to 100, and then rather than this, we'll just say max health there. Down here, we can just say health is equal to max health. Okay, so now to spawn them back into the game at a random point, or spawn point, what I'm going to do is in the game scene, first of all, make sure you give it a class name. That way it'll just simplify things. Class names, I really only use them because it gives you type hints. It just helps with avoiding errors. But basically what we're going to do here is make a function. This is going to be called get random spawn point. And then this will return $level dot get children dot pick random dot global position. So we're basically just picking a random spawn point from one of these 4 that we made. Now back in our player, let's go ahead and make an onReady variable, call it game. I'm going to give this a type of game again so that we get type hints here. And then this will be set equal to get parent. Now down here, all we have to do is say global position is equal to game dot get random spawn point. And now whenever we die, we will be spawned back at a random spawn point. Now back in our bullet script, we can just go ahead and say body dot take damage. I'm going to set this to 25, so it'll take 4 shots to kill the player. And then we can go ahead and queue free the bullet. Back in our player, let's go ahead and handle actually spawning this bullet in. So if we come down here, and then I'm going to make a new function called shoot. What we want to do is spawn in a new bullet. So I'm going to come up to the top, make a constant, and then set this to preload then that bullet scene that we just made. Then down here, we can just say var bullet is equal to bullet dot instantiate. Then we want to go ahead and add that bullet to the game scene. So we can just do get parent dot add child bullet. Then finally, we want to go ahead and tell the bullet which direction to go. So we can do bullet dot transform is equal to $gun container slash gun sprite slash muzzle dot global transform. Alright, so with that function made, let's go ahead and handle when we press the shoot button. So if input dot is action just pressed shoot, then just shoot. If you don't already have this input action, come into your project settings and go to input map and make sure you have it here. You can see bullets now shoot out from the player. They despawn whenever they hit the platforms, but you can see nothing's being synced over the network. So let's fix that. So what we can do is use what is called an RPC function. RPC functions basically let you call functions on all the other clients. The first problem I want to tackle is getting the bullet to spawn on the other player's screens. So to do that, we can make the shoot function an RPC function. So to do that, we just say at RPC, and then there's different flags that you can put in here. In this case, we want to be able to call this on all the other peers and also ourselves. So to do that, you have to put in call local. So now that we have this tagged as an RPC function, we actually have to call it differently. So instead of just shoot, we're going to do shoot.rpc, and that's it. Now with this RPC function, there's actually 2 ways you can call it. The first is RPC. This will call it on every single peer that is connected, and if you have this call local tag in here, it will call it on yourself as well. Now, let's say you only wanted to call this to a certain peer. To do that, you can use the RPC ID and then pass in the peer's ID there. But we want to call this to everyone, including ourselves, so we just put RPC and then parentheses. With that done, if we run the game now, we should see that the bullets are synchronized, and they are. Perfect. But you can see there's some weird behavior. If I shoot on the host, it despawns, but it's not despawning on the client. Now, there's one other issue here, and that is in our bullet script. You can see we're saying if not is multiplayer authority, then return, but we're never actually setting the multiplayer authority of this bullet. And you can see that here. If I host on the left, join on the right, the player who joins, their bullets go through the floor, but they despawn on the server. But if I shoot on the server, it gets destroyed on the server, but it goes through the floor on the client. The reason for this is because when a node is spawned in, it defaults to having authority to the server. To fix that in our player script, we can just say bullet.set multiplayer authority, and then we need to go ahead and get the peer ID of who shot this bullet, because again, remember, this function is running on every single client, so we can't just say multiplayer.get unique ID, because this is just going to get everyone's unique ID. It won't work. So instead, we're going to pass in an argument here. This will be shooter peer ID, and then just pass that in there. Then when we call this function, we can just pass in multiplayer.get unique ID. So now we are calling this function on every single client in the game, and we're passing in our multiplayer unique ID. That way everyone knows who shot the bullet. And this should now behave a little more like we were expecting. You can see they now despawn on whoever shot the bullet, but it goes straight through the floor for everyone else. So back in our bullet script, rather than calling queueFree right here, we can make this into an RPC function. So to call that on every single client, we do basically the same thing as spawning it in. RPC call local. If I could type, call local, then remove bullet, and then just simply queueFree in there. Okay, so now rather than just calling queueFree, we call remove bullet.rpc. It is important that you don't have parentheses after the function. That's just how Godot syntax works. So now if we run this, and I host, and I'm gonna climb up here, then join on this one. If I shoot the other player here, you can see the bullet goes straight through them. And the reason for that is because a while back I set the player's collision layer to be on 2. So come to the bullet scene and just set mask, add 2 to that. You can see the bullet now despawns, but I can hit this person a lot and nothing happens. But we do get some errors. The reason for this is because we are telling the player on our client to take damage. Basically what we need to do is turn this function in the player script into an RPC function. So what we can do is say @RPC, and we want any peer to be able to call this function. So we use the anyPeer tag, and then that's literally it. That's all we have to do. And then if we come back into the bullet script, rather than body.takedamage25, we do body.takedamage.rpc, and then this is where the ID thing comes into use. RPC ID, and then we can do body.get multiplayer authority, and then 25 for the damage parameter. Running this now, we should see that if I come up here and shoot the player 4 times, they get respawned at a new spawn point, which is pretty cool. Sometimes they will spawn back at the same spawn point. There you go. That was a long tutorial. I am sorry, but that is how to set up bullets over the network shooting. And at this point, the game is relatively finished as far as gameplay elements go. I'm not going to go super deep into adding a bunch of features to this game. If you need help with anything, I am always available in the comment section. Next tutorial will probably drop sometime next week. So I will see you guys then. Again, any questions, any feedback, drop them in the comments. I'm more than happy to help out. I know this is a very complicated topic and it's hard to explain, but trust me, once you get into making multiplayer games, it will eventually click, and it's pretty easy, actually. So I will see you guys next week. Peace out.